For 3 years, I heard footsteps under my house. Slow, deliberate footsteps in a place where no person could possibly be. I told myself it was the pipes, the old wood settling, the wind in the foundation. I told myself anything at all except the truth. It started the winter we moved in. The house was cheap, far too cheap, and we were young enough to think a bargain was just a bargain. My wife Sarah said the noises were nothing, just an old house breathing. I wanted to believe her more than I have ever wanted anything. But every single night at exactly 14 minutes past 3 in the morning, the walking began. Not random creaks, footsteps, a rhythm, the unmistakable sound of a living thing crossing a room that did not exist beneath our feet. Slow steps, heel to toe, right beneath the floorboards of our bedroom, never hurried, never afraid of being heard. Patient, like someone who had already decided he had all the time in the world and that the time belonged to him. So I tried to drown it out. I bought thicker rugs and laid them over every inch of the bedroom floor. I ran a box fan all night long just for the white noise. For a few weeks, lying very still, I could almost convince myself it had stopped. Then Sarah started finding things moved. Small things at first. A kitchen chair turned to face the window when we had left it facing the table. Her hairbrush, which lived in the bathroom, sitting clean and dry in the bottom of the kitchen sink. I blamed my own forgetfulness, the way you do when the alternative is too frightening to say out loud. I was tired, I was working long hours, I was misremembering. People misremember. That is normal. I repeated that word normal until it stopped meaning anything. The dog knew before any of us. He refused to walk down the hallway. He would stop dead at the threshold, lower his head until his chin nearly touched the floor, and growl low and steady at the bare wood, not at a corner, at the floor itself. One morning, looking for a dropped fork, I crouched and glanced under the kitchen table. There were fingerprints on the underside of it. Muddy, human fingerprints pressed into the wood from below. Someone had been under there, reaching up, touching the table we ate our dinners on. That was the day I called a plumber, not because I believed in pipes anymore, but because I needed a reason that a sane man could say without his voice shaking. Pipes. It had to be the pipes. If I said it enough, maybe it would become true. The plumber arrived on a gray Tuesday afternoon. A heavy, calm man named Dale, the kind who had crawled under 100 old houses and seen everything they hide. He had a flashlight on his belt and no patience for ghost stories. I liked him immediately. He pulled back the rug in the bedroom, took a pry bar to 3 of the floorboards and lifted them free. Then he leaned down and shone his bright light into the dark space beneath the house, the way he must have done 1,000 times before. And then he went very quiet. He stayed quiet for a long time, far too long, his head and shoulders down in the hole. When he finally climbed back out, he sat heavily on the floor and all the color had drained out of his face. There was no basement, he told me slowly. No crawl space marked on any blueprint for this house. But there was a space down there all the same. A hollow, dug out of the bare earth by hand, scraped wider over what must have been months. Maybe years. And it was not empty, he said. He would not go back down there, not for any amount of money, and I did not blame him. He waited on the porch with a cigarette he did not light while I took his flashlight and lowered myself into the dark. The air down there was warm. That was the first wrong thing. It should have been cold, the way under a house is always cold, but it was warm and close, and it smelled of turned earth and sweat and something else. Something that breathes, something that lives. Cans of food, dozens of them, were stacked neatly against the concrete foundation. Beside them lay a dirty gray blanket, worn soft and pressed into the exact shape of a body that had lain there night after night for a very long time. There was a plastic jug of water half full, a metal bucket I did not look at too closely, and a small battery lamp, the kind you clip to a tent, switched off now, but when I touched it, the bulb was still faintly warm. He had been here, recently. He had heard me coming. And there were photographs? A neat stack of them, squared off at the edges and held together with a red rubber band tucked carefully into a little shelf scraped into the dirt wall, the way you might keep something precious, something you look at often. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the rubber band loose. Part of me already knew. Part of me was screaming to climb out, to leave it, to never know. But I peeled the band away anyway, and I turned the first photograph over toward the light. It was a photograph of me, sleeping, taken from beside my own bed from above the pillow, close enough that whoever held the camera could have reached out and touched my face. The flash had not woken me. Nothing had woken me. I had slept right through it. The next was Sarah asleep, her hair across the pillow, then both of us together, then the kitchen at night, then the dog. There were months of photographs in that stack, seasons of them, a patient, careful record of every quiet hour we thought we had been alone. That was when I understood. He had not just been living beneath our house. He had been coming up through those loose boards into our rooms. He had stood over our bed while we slept, and he had taken his time, and we had never once known he was there. I climbed out of that hole so fast I tore my shirt open on a nail and did not feel it. I did not stop in the house. I ran out the front door onto the dark lawn, and I stood on the wet grass and called the police with a voice that barely worked. 2 officers came within the hour. They went down into the hollow with proper lights and a camera and gloves, the way professionals do. They were under the house for almost a full hour, and when they came up, they were not joking with each other anymore. The older of the 2 sat me down at my own kitchen table. He said the space had been in use for a long time, longer, he thought, than we had lived in the house. Whoever made it had been there before us. We had moved into his home, not the other way around. Then he asked me a question I still hear in the dark in the worst part of the night. He asked, very carefully, whether either of us had ever found the back of the hollow, whether we knew how far it actually went. I told him I thought it ended at the foundation. It did not end at the foundation. It kept going, past the concrete into the raw earth, a narrow tunnel barely wide enough for a man, shored up here and there with old wooden boards, heading away from the house and out under the yard toward the trees. They followed it the next morning in daylight with more men. It ran nearly 40 feet underground and came up, finally, inside the broken stone shell of an old well in the woods behind our street. A well everyone had forgot, a door we never knew was there. That was how he came and went all those years, never through a door, never past a window, never once tripping the alarm we were so proud of. He simply walked up out of the ground, into our lives, and back down again. The house was never really only ours. They never caught him. By the time they reached the well, he was long gone, but they found more down there, more blankets, more cans, a second clip lamp, and tucked on a stone ledge above the waterline, a second neat stack of photographs. Those photographs were not of my house. They were of another family. A different home in a different town, people I had never seen, sleeping just as we had slept. The officer looked at them for a long moment, then put them in a bag and would not tell me where they were from. We moved out within the week. We did not even finish packing properly. We sold the house fast and cheap to a young couple who laughed kindly when I stood on the porch and warned them completely seriously to check under the floor before they slept there. I gave them only one piece of advice, and I meant every word of it. Lie awake just once at 14 minutes past 3 in the morning and listen to your own house. If you hear nothing at all, then thank God and go back to sleep. Most people hear nothing. For a few months in the new place, I slept. New house, new town, 3 heavy locks on every door, a camera on the porch. I checked them all twice a night like a ritual. Slowly, foolishly, I let myself believe that the thing under the old house had stayed under the old house. Then last Tuesday, I woke, not to a sound, to a habit my body had never lost. I opened my eyes in the dark and turned my head, and the clock on the nightstand read 14 minutes past 3, exactly the way it always had. I lay very still and I listened. The house was silent. No footsteps below me, No breathing in the corner, nothing at all but my own heart. After a long minute, I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for a year, and I almost let myself smile in the dark. And then my phone lit up on the nightstand. The screen glowed white in the black room, silent, no buzz, no ringtone. One new message sitting there waiting for me from a number I did not recognize and had never seen before in my life. I opened it. It was a photograph of me, sleeping in this bed in this new house with the 3 locks and the camera and the new town, taken from the foot of the bed. Taken by the timestamp 4 minutes ago while I had been lying here telling myself I was safe. Below the photograph were 3 words, just 3. I have read them every night since, and I will read them every night for the rest of my life. The message said simply, "Found you again." I do not sleep much anymore. I sit up instead every night with all the lights on and a flashlight in my lap pointed at the floorboards, watching the seams between them, waiting to see if one of them ever moves. Because I have learned the one thing that the people in those photographs never got the chance to learn. Some people do not want your money, they do not want your house or your car or your life. They only want to watch you, and they are very, very patient.